Welcome to the third dialogue in the Climate Economics series organized by Team ECC, Energy, Environment and Climate Change, Pune International Center, in collaboration with Climate Collective Pune. The first dialogue was organized on the Earth Day, that is 22nd April, on planning climate actions post coronavirus disruption. This was followed by the second dialogue on the 16th of May on preparing for future disruptions and how industry can take leadership role for a transition to an environmentally responsible business model. The pandemic that has halted all the economic and polluting activities around the world has also given us a chance to pause and rethink our future path. This dialogue on how to align post COVID economic aspirations with climate change concerns to find win win solutions has been organized to mark the World Environment Day 2020. I would like to take a few minutes to introduce our speakers who have joined us for this dialogue today evening. First, we have the eminent scientist Dr. Raghunath Shekhar, who is the president of Pune International Center. He has played an instrumental role in shaping India's science and technology policies. He has chaired several governmental and international committees, and he is also on the board of directors of several reputed companies such as Reliance and Tata. And for his contribution to the field, he was awarded the Padma Vibhushan in 2014. The next speaker we have is Dr. Vijay Kiran, who is the Vice President of Pune International Center. Also a Padma Vibhushan awardee, he is an eminent economist who has worked with the Government of India in various capacities and also served as the director of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development and as the executive director of the International Monetary Fund. Dr. Kelkar recently co-authored the book In Service of the Republic, The Art and Science of Economic Policy with Ajay Shah. Our third speaker is Dr. Nitin Desai, who is another renowned economist known for his national and international work in the domain of public policy. Along with his work as an expert with the Government of India, he has also served as senior economic advisor for the World Commission on Environment and Development, that is the Brundtland Commission, where he introduced the concept of sustainable development. Our fourth speaker is Dr. Dipak Dasgupta, who is also a distinguished economist with expertise in climate change, finance, agriculture, and macroeconomic policy. He's a formal principal economic advisor to the Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Dr. Dasgupta is a distinguished fellow at TERI. He is also the lead author for the IPCC report to be published in 2022. And our last speaker is Professor Amitav Malik, the convener of the Climate Economics Dialogue. He is a founder member and trustee of Pune International Center. A Padma Shri awardee for his work in laser technology, Professor Malik has been a defense scientist by profession. His passion for environment and climate change is what led him to start the EECC program at PIC. He is also the brain behind the Climate Collective Pune, that is CCP, a knowledge-sharing platform of like-minded professionals engaged in various environmental and climate challenges. So a warm welcome to all the speakers and thank you for joining us today. I would now like to request Professor Malik to speak a few words of welcome.
Thank you, Mansi. Namaskar, everyone, and good evening and greetings of the World Environment Day 2020, which was yesterday. This is just to add my own welcome and say that we are very happy to have already 96 members logged into this discussion. The series of climate economics dialogue was started with a view that unless climate concern are reconciled with economic priorities, nothing much will move. And it was with this thought, we took advantage of the lockdown during the coronavirus, which gave us all an opportunity to look back and ponder. And then we thought we will address this issue of climate and economics together. So welcome to the dialogue. And of course, it is my pleasant duty to now welcome Dr. Mashelkar, our PIC president, to please chair the session and share his initial comments. Dr. Mashelkar, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, let me extend a very warm welcome to you all. This team is on climate economics dialogue. But specifically, we are going to talk about how to align the post-COVID economic aspirations with climate change concerns so that we have a win-win situation. I'd like to begin thanking Amitav for his infinite energy and commitment through this climate collective Pune. The way you have evolved programs, you have built these fantastic teams, and we just had the occasion to hear last half an hour. I'm grateful to you on behalf of the also, a very warm welcome to Nitin Desai, and also from the United States. It's early morning, so good morning, Dipak. I asked about the Pune situation, and he got it very quickly from IITM. And it's very interesting, 28 February, PM 2.5 NOx plus sulfur dioxide was 276. And within just 1.5 months, it came down from 276 to 87. But come 17 May, it has again gone back to 96. And I don't have data after that, 17 May, and I'm quite sure the figures must be high. So what I'm talking about is that when we talk about V-shaped economic recovery, let us also make a V-shaped environmental recovery to the pre-COVID days. And how do we do that? And therefore, this policy roadmap that we had for making Pune net carbon neutral by 2030, can we accelerate it? Can we sort of push it? We have done that in other areas, as we have seen. Telemedicine, for example, what could be done in 10 years has been done in 10 days. That's what UK says. Can we sort of accelerate that? That's the first point. The second point is the post-COVID, the government's commitment to green economy. As the length of recovery becomes longer, will the investment, the commitment, the regulatory approach, will they be compromised to make a rapid economic recovery? That is a challenge. And the Bloomberg report, for example, that I read today shows that world's largest 50 economies, which have earmarked or spent $12 trillion US as stimulus package or recovery package, only 18 billion, less than 0.2%, have been earmarked for climate-related challenges. And then this wonderful news, again I saw this morning, just 3 days ago, Chancellor Angela Merkel, she said out of their 130 billion euro recovery budget, as much as 41 billion euro have been locked in for climate-friendly initiatives like electric vehicles, renewable energy, and so on and so forth. So to Nitin, to Dipak, to Vijay, to everybody who participates, the question is, what do we do so that the governments follow this desirable path by sort of having this government commitment to green, not just economic recovery, but green economic recovery. The third point I want to raise is about more than ever before, there is an international alignment that is required. Countries like US have backed off, but India has taken a wonderful initiative with the inspiring tagline, "Sun never sets." The one sun, one word, one grid. It's a very innovative and ambitious plan under the International Solar Alliance of 67 countries. The question again we should discuss is, but post-COVID, what will happen to these and other such international alliances? I believe finally that the post-COVID world will see resilience as the key strategy. With huge liquidity crunch, every dollar, every euro, every rupee becomes important, and they don't want to lose any capital. So I think there is a new terminology that is return of capital, not return on capital, the survival of capital, that's going to be important. And balancing resilience with returns, which is contradiction in terms, is going to be sort of important. And two keywords will be essential and essential all the time, whether you are traveling or doing anything else, or you're shopping or you're buying or doing any other transaction at all. I think that is going to be the key. I personally feel that the current pandemic provides us with forecasts of what a full-fledged climate crisis will entail in terms of exogenous strains on both stress on both supply and demand side, disruption of supply chains, global transmission and amplification mechanisms, and so on. So, as I said earlier, this pandemic has been a humbling experience. Will that lead to a more humane, more inclusive, more sustainable world? Finally, I would say that three things are moving very rapidly. The first is digitalization, the second is decentralization, and the third is something that we need to push is decarbonization. Of course, they are all linked. What we should not be pushing is the third D, which is increasing disparity. And there are huge disparities that have just showed up after COVID. The other D that we should not be pushing is deglobalization. And we can talk about that sort of separately. So these are my initial thoughts, and I'll come back during the discussion. These are the 3 points that I've raised, and I hope among other points, these three will also be discussed. So thank you very much. Back to you, Amitav.
Yes. Mansi, take over.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Mashelkar.
Thank you, sir, for such an introduction. The points that you discussed, that of digitalization, decentralization, and decarbonization, and how we should promote them while limiting disparity and deglobalization. It's very important, I feel. Now let us get to know the views of our economists. Before that, I'm really happy to tell you that we have 100 participants who have joined this session. Yeah, over to you, Dr. Nitin Desai.
Thank you very much, Mansi. So let me first say that I'm so very happy to once again participate in an event by the Pune International Center. And so Dr. Mashelkar, Dr. Kelkar, Amitav, Malik, Dipak, it's a pleasure to be here with you in this situation. The focus of our discussion is in what way can we integrate climate-related concerns into whatever will be the process of post-COVID economic recovery. The government has announced a certain 20 lakh crore program on this. There's very little there on the climate side or the environment side for that matter. Because I think essentially what they have focused on is really facilitating measures to stimulate investment, basically in the form of more liquidity, lower interest rates, and some measures to provide some relief on the tax side and so on. Now, the fact is that you will not get that stimulus coming in unless there is something that will take care of the tremendous fall in GDP that we would have experienced. Minimum of 5% this year, I guess. And the amount of actual money that is being pumped into the hands of households in this 20 lakh package is only 2 lakh. That is about 1% of GDP, much less than the 3 to 5% which most economists have been arguing for. So I would say that basically what the recovery shape is going to be is still very, very open. Because I don't see this investment stimulus taking off unless the demand side takes off. But leave that to one side. We're not talking about that. What we're talking about is whatever shape the recovery takes, what can we do to integrate climate concerns? First, the recovery and the management of the epidemic are going to go in parallel. It's not as if one fine day you'll see the epidemic has ended and then the epidemic has ended and the recovery can start. No, it's going to go in parallel because this COVID epidemic is not going to go away just like that. It's going to be around with us for some time. So I would expect that there will continue to be a major focus, and there should be a major focus on healthcare issues, not just the physical arrangements, etc., but many other healthcare issues. And certainly the government's program has some elements of that. I would like to see much more. I would like to see a doubling of expenditures on healthcare, because that is one of the reasons why we've been having difficulties in coping with the epidemic. Now, the question that I would ask is there some way of integrating climate concerns into the initiatives and measures which are going to be taken for the control of the epidemic? Now, there's one obvious one. For instance, this is an epidemic which clearly affects people's lungs, and therefore anything that you do to improve the quality of healthcare, air quality, is going to be a beneficial thing for the epidemic management. And that is also something which is very positive from the environmental point of view. And depending on how you do it, can also be very positive from the climate point of view. This is an example of how one can say, okay, very good idea. We'll focus on the epidemic and let us identify points in the initiative which are being taken to control the epidemic, where we can piggyback our climate concerns immediately on that. There are other areas. Somebody earlier in the video mentioned video conferencing. Now, I've seen this in the organizations I'm involved in. They're suddenly saying this, oh my God, why do we have to have such a big office? We are working quite well. It's now about half are at home. Earlier, 2/3 were at home. And they're saying, why can't we continue with this? This will save us a lot of money. Now, if it leads to people who are more office work oriented rather than manufacturing or something, to go in for some combination of office participation and home participation in work, then it could lead to a significant reduction in commuter load, and that will certainly be beneficial also for climate. So my first point that I would make to all of you is start looking for things in the various initiatives which are being taken to contain the epidemic, on where one can integrate some of our climate concerns. Second point. Now it's unavoidable that we cannot just focus on controlling the recovery. Will have to involve more than just the healthcare side. It will have to involve some elements on the economic recovery side. And that will, the government right now is focused on a very generalized way in liquidity easing, in easing the terms of credit and so on, except perhaps for agriculture, where they've announced a very wide-ranging plan for the modernization, particularly on the marketing side, allowing farmers to sell what they want. And there are other things like the easy to support prices and so on. Yet integrated any genuine environmental or climate concerns into the program they were announced for agriculture. A point that was made earlier in the video. And this has certainly happened. Now, one of the things that I've noticed in the narrative on climate change is that while the earlier discussions 30 years ago were on the science, what is really happening? Are we really humans responsible for climate change? Now, that is now behind us. By and large, there's a certain consensus on the science, and the consensus that it is humans who are responsible. And increasingly, the climate narrative has been started focusing on what are called win-win initiatives. Amitav Mallik's paper has been mentioning some of them also. Very typical example of a win-win initiative is renewable energy. Is renewable energy. And, sorry. So I would say that this is an example of something which will serve climate ends, but which will also serve the purposes of growth, of energy supply, energy access, and so on. Energy efficiency is the other area, which is also a win-win situation because it leads to reductions in energy costs and so on. Now, the question that I would ask is, do we have a policy framework which is capable of pushing this win-win? And can we make that part of the recovery process? Here, I would have mentioned one particular thing, and that is the power sector. Oh. Sorry, I got to be muted.
So we can hear you now.
Okay, you can hear me now. Okay. What I would say is that we need a radical change in the power sector. You cannot run a power system which has sources of supply which are distributed as it would be in a renewable energy oriented system, and hugely distributed if we supply. And if that is the case, you can't run it with a centralized grid management. You can't run it with a system where power trading is on, most of it is on bilateral power purchase agreements. You can't run it with tariff restrictions which are not mindful of costs and returns and so on. I would say sooner or later, if we want to get into this win-win option of renewables, we will have to have a wholesale market in electricity, a systematic wholesale market in electricity, which we do not have. Only 10% of electricity now is traded through the electricity exchange. The rest is all on PPAs. And there are all sorts of problems there, whether payments are being made, whether PPA agreements are being honored, etc., etc. So I think one of the things that has to be done is a radical reform on the electricity side, if we really want the win-win initiative. And I'm hoping that there are some people, there's an excellent group in Pune, the Prayas group, which does very good work on the power sector. I hope somebody from Prayas is participating in this and will have a word or two to say that. Similarly, on the energy efficiency side, I think it's not simply a matter of technological initiatives to push this or that. You also have to look at your fiscal system, whether the fiscal system, the tax system, is encouraging the use of energy efficient appliances and vehicles and so on. Let me now quickly turn to the third point. I've spoken of the climate narrative focusing on the win-win options, mainly renewable energy and energy efficiency. In my opinion, these are probably sufficient to keep you on the required path of carbon mitigation till about 2030 at most. Beyond that, we will have to look beyond the win-win options. We have to start looking at things which change the nature of energy demand. We can't just say, okay, no, we'll take the energy demand as given, we'll find simply better ways of meeting that energy demand through renewables, through more efficient appliances and so on. No, we will have to start looking at the way in which energy demand is generated. Now, this is something which, to give an example, urban design. It's absolutely crucial that anything that we look ahead in future, when you talk of electric vehicles, when you're talking in terms of other things, we will have to re-examine the nature of our settlements and our urban design and so on. Some of it, incidentally, will fit in well with the health concerns we are going to dominate the next couple of years, at least in terms of policy. So I would say that we need to go beyond, the climate narrative has to go beyond the win-win options into those which require you to change the nature of energy demand, the nature of energy use, and so on. So let me summarize my 3 points. First, let us start looking for ways in which we can see what elements in the COVID management initiatives should be there at least for another year or two, can be connected, can be synergized with the concerns that we have on the climate side. Second, let us see whether in the process of economic recovery, which is probably going to take a little longer than most people think, whether in that process of recovery, we can really find ways of pushing the win-win options like renewable energy and energy efficiency. But that requires more than just technical initiatives. It requires more than just grand goals and statements. It requires fundamental policy changes in the way in which we manage the energy system. And my third point is we also have to start looking beyond the win-win options into things which actually start looking at how to change the nature of energy demand itself. So let me just conclude at this point. I've taken by 12 minutes. And so thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Desai, for such a well-structured analysis of the current pandemic situation and how we should go about it in the future. And some of the important points that you raised were like, we need to look at the win-win solutions as well as consider systematic wholesale markets for clean energy and tax system, and even consider urban design. So these are some really important points. Now we would like to move on to our next economist, Dr. Dipak Dasgupta. Sir, you can start with your presentation. Can Dr. Dasgupta hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, can you see me?
Yeah.
Yes, sir, I can see you.
Okay. So my great thanks to Dr. Kelkar and Professor Malik and EIC, of course, for bringing us here and the opportunity to speak to you. And greetings to Nitin, who we just heard, as erudite as ever, and Dr. Mashelkar, of course. So in the midst of this COVID pandemic, we seek these opportunities to talk to one another, and it's such a great thing that PIC has organized this. Greetings to all my friends. So we are in Washington. I'm in Washington, still locked down, and as you are in India, and we're beginning to open up, and we're seeing the possibilities. I was unsure what to talk about. The impact of COVID, the macroeconomic situation, how is the government doing, and what to do with climate after this, win-win opportunities. These are all issues that are important. But to my mind, the most important issue right now is the challenge of building a new future for India and for the global economy. And what I mean by that is the challenge of a new social compact. And let me turn a little bit to my slides. There's a lot of words in my graphics, but the choice is the paths that we take and this after this crisis. So let me see if I can switch over to my slides. One moment. I think I have it. Can you see it, the slides?
Yeah, we can see it, sir.
Okay, good. So placing India on a new path is really the topic that I chose. And I would, let me see, slide show. 1 second. Yep. So what I have in mind, and I want you to think of the right-hand side, the chart which suggests equity and the just transition to climate path after COVID-19. So what has happened is that, as we saw in the world over the last decade and more in climate, COVID-19 is showing exactly the same thing. That our most vulnerable populations and citizens with the least resources are facing the highest costs. And these are migrants, the urban poor, the rural farmers, and the young. Unempowered is what I call them. And Dr. Mallik's suggestion that suddenly our real priorities have become clear is about this issue of how do we address the growing inequalities that's happening. So the chart that you have on your right-hand side, shows two parts. One, over the blue line, is how did we get here? And it's about growing astonishing incomes at the top, 30%, but at the same time, growing massive vulnerability at the bottom. And then you see the impacts of the crisis, the COVID shock. And what it does is the rich are hurt, but we manage. The vulnerable dips dramatically, and we get catastrophic impact. Going into the future, you have two parts. Part one is what I call business as usual, and it leads us back quickly to an unsustainable future. And that little black line, to me, is a representation of what happens to GHGs. GHGs dip during the crisis, but keeps coming back again as we go to business as usual. Path two, which is the green path, we go to a very different future. We go to lower consumption of corporates, households, find resources, and build resilience at the bottom of the pyramid. And health, education, sustainable access to energy, safety nets, only then can GHG emissions downward. But the message out of this crisis is not governments, but us. Society, NGOs, youth, trust, the third sector needs to step in when governments and markets can't do what we expect them to do. And this has already started across the world. Within India, from the Sundarbans to Mumbai and to Pune and 10,000 other places and world. Now let me turn to a little bit of the first priority. The first priority is that we need to scale up social funds massively. It is no longer enough for the third sector to operate with band-aids of small resources. The third sector, which is us, which is society as a whole, civil society, NGOs and others, we need to do more. I would like to take us back to history a little bit, understand how you scale up social funds and what did the big figures in history tell us about. Turning to Gandhiji, all through his life, he was an irrepressible fundraiser. As his train would stop at stations, he would cup his hands outside the train and so that people could put money and coins into it. And then he went on to gold, bangles. And to quote Gandhiji out of Louis Fisher's biography of him, he said, "My army of my sweethearts is daily increasing. The latest recruit is Rani Bala of Bird 1. 10 years old, I was looking at her and casting furtive glances at her 6 heavy gold bangles." Exactly the same thing that he said to my 10-year-old mother, "Beti, mujhe kya doge?" in Delhi in 1930. Swamiji Vivekananda, he's thanking the Maharaja of Mysore, Chetri, people of Madras for funds that took him to America. And he says, primarily in his letter, quoting him, he says, primarily the reason for my coming to America is to raise funds for an enterprise. Tagore does exactly the same thing. He travels perpetually across the world to raise funds for what? For a purpose for Shantiniketan. And he tells Gandhiji, not charity, we're raising it for a purpose. We know Netaji, he didn't build the INA out of nothing. He built it from the funds and the jewelry contributed by the rich and ordinary Indians in Rangoon, Singapore, Malaysia. And during the 1962 war, when we were in trouble, gold jewelry contributed by the rich and ordinary citizens raised funds. So the lessons of history are clear. When you face a crisis, lesson number one is raising social funds is crucial, massively. Lesson number two, if the purpose is right, if the purpose is good, people give. And lesson number three is do not simply rely or hand over to governments, put it in right, accountable institutions, the course, the treasury, and manage it well, and build social trust. So let me turn to where is this secret pile of giving that we should be tapping. And the giving is India holds more gold in bangles, jewelry, and bars than any other nation in the world. 24,000 tons is what is held by households, 4,000 tons held in temple trust, 600 tons in Reserve Bank of India. Total value is around $1,800 billion. Unproductive. It's lying in lockers, almirahs, vaults. No one uses them anymore. It is not even used in wedding displays because it is unsafe, but we still buy more gold every year. US $45 billion. Use it instead for a social purpose, as our great leaders have told us before. Build a new socially resilient. So what do we do? Right-hand side of my chart talks about credit rating agencies have just got India's rating to near junk status. We don't need to borrow gold. What we need, one gold bangle out of 4 for on the middle classes, one gold bar out of 4 for the rich and even the temple. By this itself, we would raise enough to be able to deal with the social compact, new social compact. The value of that giving would be something astonishing. 20 to 25% of that, if over time, it would be about $360 to $450 billion, $70 to $90 billion invested every year over the next decade, 5 to 10 years, much, much more than what the GOI, Government of India, has announced and is able to do in its constraint. Let me now turn to what is scale of giving, why I think India is underplaying its strength dramatically. The largest private fund in the world is Bill Gates Foundation. It has a corpus of 48 billion and disburses $5 billion a year. Imagine what I just told you about India. India has a scale which is dramatically bigger. Who is the largest trust in India? Probably the Tatas. How much do they disburse in social funds? About $150 million a year. Very, very small. Think of our small neighbor right next to us. The largest trust in Bangladesh is BRAC, and it has assets of $3.5 billion and disburses $700 million, which is 5 times the size of the Tata Trust. A single trust in Bangladesh gives 5 times the level that the Tata Trust. We must do better. We need distributed funds, 100 such funds across. If there's 2,500 in Bangladesh, we need 1,000 per state, each with about 100 crores would be a good start. Last point, Government of India, legal, politicians, corporates should keep taxes, regulatory distance from this third sector, social sector. We need special status. They need to work with us, not against. COVID-19 shows why. Everywhere, the work in Pune, the work on the ground that is being done is by this third sector, and crowding in is what I'm talking about. So the first message is scale up social funds, turn to Gandhi, Vivekananda, Tagore, and what we know from them about history. Second issue, once you have this manage the course, the treasury well, collect it in a national people's drive, households, NGOs, temple trusts, citizens, and keep it safe. And the only safe place, I think, at this point of time is with the Reserve Bank of India as keeper. Distributed fundraising, accountable management bodies, perhaps with women in majority in states, cities, municipalities, temple trusts, proper accounting, not in the hands of government. Some misappropriation, yes, possible, but more sunshine is the only answer. We have lots of lessons around the world on how this sector grows in strength with this over time. Community owned and run, grassroots. Number three, what do we do once we raise the money is the social transformation. And the social transformation, the two parts, the green part that we're talking about has basically three characteristics. First, let the funds be raised, gold, deposited with the RBI, and RBI on lends to the banks, financial institutions, green bonds for all the accelerated low carbon investments that we need over the next 5 to 10 years. Clean energy, solar, wind, clean transport, railways, urban mobility, electric buses, e-rickshaws, metros, clean cities, safe water, flood protection, drought-proof agriculture, drip irrigation, local community. The money goes, Kosh provides it to the banks, financial institutions, governments, private sector to do what they are capable of doing. Number two, RBI does ask them to provide 6 to 8% interest rate, market rates on the funds to be distributed, back to the trusts which have raised these funds. And number three, the trusts then set up to me the priority is social safety net spending for the bottom 30% or 40% of all poor households. The amounts that I've talked about is enough to pay 2,000 rupees per month and more to every poor family. 8 crore families, female heads, for what? For education, health, and social safety nets. Total additional spending would be around, estimated, is $25 billion, 3 times bigger than the money that we spend under Manrega, as given by the numbers by the government. 3 times bigger. What do we get out of it is also sustainable growth dividend, 1% faster annual GDP, that comes from the faster investment, 1.5% from the consumer demand stimulation, and all backed up by hard currency reserves. So 2.5% annual. On the green side of the slide, I have some estimates of what the impacts would be if we were able to do these transformative, raise the funds, manage it well, provide it for social transformative purposes. We would get a carbon reduction that we saw under COVID-19 dramatically accelerate, 5 times faster reduction that we've ever seen, cumulative over 10 years, 12 to 15% of India's annual emissions. Second, faster GDP growth and decent jobs, productive jobs, 2.5% faster growth, real value of carbon saved even more. Third, real gains to human education. Finally, we would be able to breaking the barriers to the vulnerability of the bottom 30. Enough. We have resources to do this. Everyone socially gains. We don't need to do everything on day one. Start to show results, build the foundations carefully, show what India is capable of, build the social capital. Behavioral change takes time. Build an impeccable foundation to do this. And one of the most famous non-economists who won the prize, Nobel Prize in Economics, was Elinor Ostrom. And she has a splendid paper. She talks about going beyond markets and states, third sector. Distributed community action is the answer to complex problems. And as we've read in Dr. Kelkar's most recent book, right now, the greatest priority is building these strong institutions. Business as usual can't go on. We will not survive if we go back to the India that we knew. We need to reinvent it, just like as our strong leadership in history has taught us. We need to raise the funds, we need to manage the funds, and we need to empower the third sector and build the strongest institutions. PIC could have started in Pune and might wish to start this initiative in Pune. Pune has great social capital, and Pune, to me, has a lot of gold as well. Imagine what PIC could have done in COVID-19 if PIC had built such a corpus of well-managed funds. Last, examples of what works is always important, and Bangladesh is actually a very good example of what social capital and the third sector is capable of when grassroots NGOs go to work at large scale. Infant mortality rates, underweight babies, stunting growth rates of children are all much better, and growth and show a much faster decline than in India over the last decade and more. And I have a paper, Rajan Ray, who's a close colleague, 2018, on showing this. Growth too is faster in Bangladesh than it is in India. And within India, we have the examples of Himachal Pradesh, Kerala, and Tamil Nadu, all providing very good examples of what you can do when you have social capital built. So that to me is the story. New social compact, scale up social funds, turn to the history, manage the course and the treasury well, and build the social transformation. And if we do that, we will be in a more just and equitable world, and also a faster and capable of handling to the turning down of the climate change impacts and avoiding business as usual and catastrophic vulnerability. So that's what I had to say. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you, Dr. Dasgupta, for the amazing lesson from history that we should be taking while progressing, as well as for highlighting the importance of the social sector and addressing the inequality and issues of the vulnerable that COVID-19 has made worse. Now I would like to ask Dr. Vijay Kiran, the Vice President of PIC, to make his comments. Over to you, Dr. Kelkar.
Good evening to everybody. We just had. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
Can people hear me?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay. No, I just thought, first let me give my greetings to all the participants and our distinguished speaker. Both Dipak and Nitin has very lucidly explained the important economic issues. I have to only make 2 or 3 comments in addition, as to supplement to what they have said. And my concern about making this point is, how do we encourage our country to take right decisions? We know where to go, we know what to do. How to ensure that we move in that direction? In other words, what incentives can we provide to the system to move towards direction which are desirable? And I want to make 3 points in this regard. In any system, it is more likely decisions are taken if things are, where you want to take decisions are measurable. For instance, there was a very important committee under the chairmanship of Sir Parthu Dasgupta, where he had given very, I think, a very thoughtful and very doable report in which he has outlined how India can move from computing what he calls green GDP for the country. In other words, you ensure that what you measure in terms of economic performance takes into account all the climate concerns, and that's one important sort of incentive for the country to take, if you start measuring where you want to go. So this is one. I think we should probably look at this Dasgupta Committee report and start to see in what manner in which we can move towards measuring the green GDP, so that we don't take conventional, only maximize the conventional metric, but the more correct metric which harmonizes the climate concerns in measurement. This is point number 1.
give. Second, which is I know the economists are known to know only price of everything or value of nothing. But if you want to move, incentivize people to move in the right direction in which we desire, I think we have to look at the entire pricing regime of our natural resources. I mean, I'll give two examples which are everybody knows. The way the water is wasted, for instance, in urban areas. Water and is phenomenal. I mean, Pune is a classic example in which the enormous misutilization of water, and also that's why the polluted water is not recycled, because fresh water is free. So I think it's very important the pricing of the various important inputs is a pricing policy is we have not even started in the beginning. Which also second example of course the carbon taxes. The incidence of carbon taxes is also in India is not used as an instrument to promote to move towards solar energy, which is of course will benefit out of this. So second policy instruments we have to think about is the pricing of natural resources, so that we incentivize every economic agent, consumer or producer in using the resources more efficiently. And third is my tentative idea. I have not really thought through this, but increasingly when I was talking for myself, I started thinking of environment and ecology much more after I became grandfather, because then I realized that the choices I make have enormous implication to my grandchildren. Now, then it sort of also increasingly sort of occurred to me that can we give larger weightage to the younger generations in decision making in public policy? For instance, Rajya Sabha instead of being House of Elders, maybe become House of Youth, because then I think you have political system in which political processes will take into account much larger way the concerns of the younger generation. The decision making will become long term. They will start taking long term horizon rather than the older generation who has probably less self interest in the future compared to younger one. So is it possible to make a systemic change in our political economy or in our politics, which will force or enable to have larger weight to the interest of the younger generation? Maybe we can make a beginning in local elections. I'm not saying just before starting international elections. In local election, can we give larger weightage in our municipal corporation elections to the youth? Because take again Pune, for instance, the entire, I think point was made by Nitin about a new urbanization. Now the concerns of youth are not taken into account in terms of thinking about design of cities. Now, can we make a beginning by allowing a larger voice, political voice, to the younger generation in decision making compared to the other part of your society? So, is that a way? Will it change the decision making? Will it give incentivize decisions which are much more long term in nature compared to short termism, which is otherwise there in all elections? How do we move away from short-termism to long-termism? Because all concerns of ecology or climate are long-term, and the temptation of immediacy compels today the politics to take decisions which are not necessarily in the interest of. At least in our household now, Lata gives much larger voice to our grandchildren's desires and what they want rather than to me. Where she said, look, this world is really for the younger generation. And I think we may start taking that to at the political level, starting with local bodies, and then probably look at larger bodies. So to sum up the 3 points, one is, as I mentioned, can we use prices for incentivizing people to have a behavior which is consistent with the climate objectives. Second, can we start measuring the economic performance correctly by starting with green GDP, which focuses attention on the climate issues. And third, is there a way we can change the political process, the politics of it, where we can give larger weightage to Greta of the world, rather than Vijay Kiran of the world, because I think that generation has to have much larger stake, and they will take it a little more seriously the long-term requirements of the economy. So let me stop at this stage, and once again thank Professor Amitav Malik for taking this very important initiative, and I look forward now to listening to other participants. Thank you.
1 minute.
Thank you, Dr. Kelkar, for raising some important questions about how to achieve the goals that we are discussing today. Ideas of... yes, sir.
Amitabh, if you permit, Lata wants to add just one word. And you know,
Yes,
in this
yes,
house,
please.
she has the last word. So
Absolutely, please. Yeah. Welcome, Lata.
Am I permitted to just take just half a minute?
Yes, yes, of course.
No, I just wanted to put in, Vijay, I just want to say how the children are impacted and how the children make a difference. For instance, Vijay, I think I heard Vijay talking about our grandsons. For the last 2 years, they have switched from a shower bath to a bucket bath. I mean, it's a very small example, but how even small children can take things seriously, and they realized that they were using up much more water by taking a shower bath, and they switched to a bucket bath, which is not enjoyable for them, but they realize. Sometimes my limited point is raising awareness in the very young to the slightly older, because this planet belongs to them. Hum kitne din ke mehman hai pata nahi. So creating greater awareness of, and they pick up, they pick up these things and they implement them. They don't know about policies, they don't know about anything else, but if they are convinced, they make these, and these marginal changes, I think, can impact the planet.
Very true. Thank you.
Our little one, the younger fellow, he has envisioned the world, all the countries holding hands. This is his visual in his mind. So he thinks about the world as one, and different countries holding hands. So he's an artist. So he envisions that one day that all the countries will all come together and they'll be holding hands. This was my very limited input. But the point being that young children, greater awareness to be created among the young and the not so young, because we are just phasing out of the planet very soon in any case. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for the really important concern raised by you about the contribution of young children. Now I would like to request Professor Amitav Malik to give the final presentation. Over to you, Malik, sir.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I have a tough job. 4 eminent speakers, and then I'm supposed to speak. I don't know what I'm going to speak, but but thank you for Lata's intervention. We are all acutely aware that that we need to focus on the future. We have enjoyed a whole lot in our time, the generation. We have seen fantastic changes, but the next 30, 40 years, 50 years are going to see even larger changes. And that is what the young generation has to get tuned and prepared. And whatever we do, for whether it's economy or whether it's climate change or environment, it is all for the new generation. After this very thought-provoking discussion, sharing of very varied thought processes, I think I will play safe and stay to the topic of the discussion, which is aligning economic aspirations with climate concern, and Dr. Mashelkar suggested very nicely that the climate concerns as well as the aspirations will be now be colored by our experience of the COVID. So let me also go to my slides. Give me a moment. Yeah. So essentially, the COVID crisis has vividly demonstrated how how things can very clearly change, and how climate crisis, what can it can do to human life and livelihood, because climate crisis will be a threat multiplier. So there is a new realization that invisible damage can cause mass fear, paralyzing economy, and of course the normal way of life as we know it today. Climate crisis will also be an invisible threat, and the future crisis situation we can actually combine together to suddenly, sorry, something is obstructing my view. I'm trying to adjust it. Bear with me for just a moment. Yeah. So future crisis situation can combine simultaneously and suddenly affect large section of humanity and other life forms. Unlike pandemic, there can be no quick fix vaccine for the climate crisis. Hence, the impact will be much deeper and wider. COVID-19 has also demonstrated that the foundation of the economic progress and prosperity are very fragile in the present model of economy. Increasing consumerism with growing carbon footprint is damaging both the environment stability as well as the economic sustainability, and both of which are essential for human prosperity. Climate change disruptions can be multiple and simultaneous. That's a new angle that we need to understand. It could be due to health hazards, air pollution, heat waves, food and water shortages. All of this can engulf large swaths of the society. Similarly, sea level rise due to glacial melting can shrink habitable coastlines and spread vector-borne diseases. All this can seriously affect economic productivity. And again, all of this can combine together to cause mass migration and, of course, international tension. Preventing catastrophe, disruption to normal life on Earth must be the top priority for any economic recovery. Otherwise, whatever recovery is made will be short-lived. Although the climate change, we also have the ecological crisis that is also growing simultaneously. And unless we address these twin crisis situations, just trying to fix financial or business slowdown will be meaningless, in my opinion. The days of perceiving environmental protection laws as an impediment to economic growth, I think, truly are over. National wealth has many dimensions, but GDP that we go by only measures the financial gains. As Dr. Kelkar just now mentioned, the pricing and value are different. And unfortunately, what we don't measure, and that of course never gets the attention. So neglecting global warming and climate change now will equal to endangering the very economic stability. This calls for a need for a fundamental policy level change to recognize that economy and environment are two sides of the same coin. Any further delay in climate action will have huge economic consequences, as well as it will pose serious livelihood challenges to the younger generation. Nature's quick recovery that we have witnessed during the pandemic slowdown is ample proof that human intervention, if it is reduced significantly, natural ecosystem can recover pretty fast. This is exactly what proactive climate action must also aim for, but this must be done in a planned and a calibrated manner so that there is no or as small a downside as possible. The Earth Overshoot Day we all know about. It was 27 July in 2019, and at the rate we are going, it could reach 1st July not before long. What does it mean? It would mean that we will require either 2 Earths or half the global population, particularly the population that has a large ecological footprint. But this can be also achieved by humanity's total ecological and carbon footprint if that can be reduced to half within the next two decades. An innovative approach for low carbon development must now emerge for the future of economy. This can not only mitigate climate change, but also help economy to progress without much of a penalty to the nature. This can thus enable humanity and nature both to live in harmony, and both can then thrive. Economic recovery now, therefore, must be based on win-win solution, and that's what we are trying to address in this dialogue. Some examples, of course, are, we know, the rapid transition to renewable energy, whether it is solar, wind, biogas, etc., to fossil fuel dependence. But that's only part of the story. Human lifestyle must change for sustainable practices for the next generation to have a decent future. The immediate challenge, of course, is to bridge the emission gap between the total greenhouse gas emission and the total sequestration, absorption, and CO2 removal capacity all put together. Exploitation of Earth resources and loss of biodiversity must be stopped with full realization of the irreversible environmental damage and the consequences that it can have. This cannot be done without radical changes in present economic practice. Of course, there is a feeling that technology will help at the end. Yes, of course. Indeed, innovative technology of carbon dioxide removal or storage can help. But this can only happen if, and this can only be economically viable, if the GHG gas emission and environmental degradation are reduced drastically. Only then can technology help towards restoring the Earth ecosystem balance and help human civilization to progress. So it is time to recognize that GDP is not a true measure of human progress and prosperity. I think I'm taking a major bold announcement in the presence of eminent economists, but I see that as an inevitable change that we must do. New low carbon economy must define a new national index for sustainable progress and prosperity. So I feel like suggesting, why not we think of a national well-being index that can guide all future development. And of course, then this can avoid not only major economic disruptions, but it can also prevent any loss to human well-being, because that will be the focus then. I think this is where I stop here. And thank you. Back to you, Mansi.
Thank you, sir, for sharing the important message on how we need to have a different index of measuring our growth apart from GDP. Now we will start the Q&A part of the session. So in order to accommodate the maximum number of questions, I would kindly request the speakers to limit their response to maximum 2 minutes and at the most 3 minutes. In case some of the questions are not asked due to time constraint, I would kindly request the participants to write to us and we will get back to you with the answer. So the first question I have received is for Dr. Mashelkar. So can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes. So the question is that you raise an important point of how disparity should not increase. And the pandemic has exposed that economic growth has not decreased disparity, but in fact, it has made it worse. So then who is this economic growth for? And should we be looking at degrowth like many countries across the world are now focusing on?
Well, I would not say degrowth, but I will say equitable growth. Inclusion is the key word, all right? As you know, I am a great champion of innovation, but I'm a great champion of inclusive innovation. Giving access and affordable access of high quality is entirely possible, and India specializes in that. We are 10x people, 10 times better, but 10 times cheaper, whether it is education, whether it is health, whether it is any service. So I would say that inclusive innovation led sustainable growth, which encompasses the whole society, would be my strategy, my recommendation for India to sort of adopt that strategy. And it can work, I can tell you, because if there was time, I would have given you example just by picking up the health sector and what difference it is actually making.
Thank you, sir. The next question we have is for Dr. Nitin Desai. Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. So the question is that with rock bottom fossil fuel prices and the COVID experience, should it be easier to cut subsidies for fossil fuels and introduce carbon tax now?
I would say that yes, it is possible to do that, but it's unlikely that this is going to happen. And I would say that yes, it is true, fossil fuel prices have dropped, but basically even today, the competitiveness of renewable energy, if we had a power system which was rational, which did not necessarily give particular advantages to fossil fuels, which really allowed prices to affect investments and consumption and behavior, then I think it is possible for us to move over to this place. Second, carbon tax has to come, one form or another. There is no way in which we can get the incentives that we need for climate action without some form of people paying a price for the extent to which they are worsening the problem of climate change. And that means a carbon tax has to come in some form or the other. Now, how that will come, how that will happen, and this is where I would think one dimension which we haven't discussed is the international cooperation dimension, which Professor Mashelkar had. And to some extent, I would increasingly focus global attention on these policy issues rather than just the targets. Let me just stop here.
I have one more question for you, sir. So historically, increased energy efficiency has not led to aggregate energy use. So should we consider a cap on aggregate energy as a lever for policy making?
I would say, yes, it is true that people argue that you make the energy, people use fans more than because they use less electricity and so on. That has been, this argument has been there. But the reality is that particularly if you look at those things which are used in commercial applications and others, it does make a lot of sense to go in for energy efficiency because there the consumption is not that price elastic. Energy efficiency matters particularly where consumption of energy is not as price elastic as in other places. So yes, there is a fair point in the question, but I would not count that much on energy efficiency. I think we have to have changes in the way in which energy demand gets generated. Nobody consumes energy just for its own sake. You consume energy because I want to be cool. But if I live in a building which requires less intensive cooling because it is designed with better insulation, then I would say that yes, I'll be better off. That's what I want. I want a cool home. I don't necessarily want to have an air conditioner, which is blasting a cold air in my room. So I would say that this is where we have to start looking at changing the nature of energy demand itself. And that is going to take much more work than what we have done so far. So we're looking at simple supply side options. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next question I have is for Dr. Dipak Dasgupta. So can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
Yes. So the question is, what social sector contributions are required to become less dependent on coal, oil, and gas, and to make our energy security more resilient?
Let me see. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, sir, I can.
Yeah, I mean, there's the opportunities that we have for becoming more using less carbon intensive sectors and to move to low carbon economy is examples are all over the place, from buildings to how we use transport to how we lead our daily lives, how we save water. So these opportunities are massive. The problem that we have is slightly different. The problem that we have is that we have a system in which governments are failing and which the private sector is failing to deliver these opportunities. If you think about a question that was asked in this related in this chat is where and why did governments fail and where and why do markets fail? And the answer to that is when you face complex problems like that, which goes down to our actions, households, very local actions, governments can't do this. Governments are incapable of delivering everything for everyone. It is simply not feasible. And if you think about how governments fail, the literature is massive. Governments fail all the time. And a related question is, what do I think about the Prime Minister's fund? The Prime Minister collects a lot of funds. The funds never flow. They never come through. We know these failures. Related is will Atmanirbhar Bharat deliver? Again, we need to decentralize. We need to bring, if we are to achieve the climate resiliency with equity, that's my message. You got to think of the third sector. And that's the work that's going on in COVID. Lots and lots of missed opportunities all over the place. And if we don't institutionally build on creating that space for the third sector to work and fund it properly, then unfortunately, we will continue to see massive government failures and massive private market failures all the time. Related issue is, will this ever happen? Will this change that I talk about, will it ever happen? And I can only say that yes, it does happen. It can happen. It has been happening in US. It has been happening in Germany. It has been happening in Europe. It has been happening in Bangladesh. It has been happening in Kerala, Himachal. It's time that it should happen in Pune as well. And the time is for us to empower people and raise the resources from our own. So that's my answer.
Thank you, sir. The next question I have is for Dr. Kelkar. Kelkar, sir, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes.
I can hear you.
Yeah. So since you've worked closely with the government of India as a role of an economist. So the question is that with government finances in trouble in the post-COVID economy, how will the subsidy-supported green energy production find investment support? And what could India's Green New Deal look like?
No, as I mentioned to you that we have to tax or price properly all the inputs which are consumed, natural inputs like the emission of carbon dioxide, for instance, has to be taxed, or water consumption has to be taxed. We have to raise resources and ensure that you're encouraging the better use of resources. And resources, I don't think the medium-term framework, I don't anticipate problem of raising adequate resources, frankly. There will be a problem in the next 2 years. The economy will a little bit slow down, so we'll have problems in the next couple of years. But I do see the economy coming back to the growth path, and raising resources with efficient tax system, I think should be possible. Because our tax GDP ratio is still there's a lot of headroom for increasing our tax GDP ratio compared to at the compared level of incomes around the world. So moving towards the desirable path of the ecologically desirable path is certainly doable, even fiscally also, in medium term. I'm not saying it can be done tomorrow, but I'm looking at the medium term framework, and it's possible to do it. I'm not pessimistic at all in terms of fiscal resources.
Yeah. So again, taking from one of the points that you spoke about, how we need to get more youth participation in the process of decision making. How can students on an individual scale what can they do to develop a sustainable environment? What are your
I
thoughts?
was mentioning the political process. I think just give give larger weightage to the political participation of young generation in our local governments. For instance, I think I know I'm now going to make a very sort of corner solution. The weight of your weight in the vote will decline as your age is increased. So my vote, as if I'm now more than 75, will be half as important as the weight of, say, who's 25 years old. So you give larger weight in decision making in the political process, give greater weight. It's a democratic process where people participate in decision making. There will be larger weight, and you will incentivize the decision making long term. So students will, when they find that their vote has their participate greater weight, they will take more interest in the issues which concern us. Today, their interest is much less, even participation in elections and contesting political offices. So I think you have to give at least local elections, local areas, give larger weight to younger generation. Because I think their stakes are much higher than mine.
Thank you for that input, sir. I have the next question for Professor Malik. So are you there?
Yes.
Yes. So according to an article in the Economic Times, overproduction of green energy without corresponding storage capacity is leading to blackouts in Europe. So according to you, what specific plan should India have to add substantially to storage capacity in tandem with additional green energy production capacity?
Well, I would say, first of all, most of the green energy that we are talking about, the emphasis should be on distributed generation. So if we generate the energy where we want to use it, not only we use it with almost 100% efficiency, but we also reduce the complication of where is excess generation and where it's so on and so forth. Battery technology is making tremendous progress. It is also becoming cost effective. therefore, it's not very far that we will have the option of renewable plus battery, giving us the option of 24/7 electricity requirement. So this is a very dynamic field. Things are very quickly changing. Technologies are evolving very fast. But the promise is very solid. So it's a chicken and egg kind of a problem, that unless the renewable comes to a certain maturity, the fossil fuel will have to stay. And yet, unless the fossil fuel is desensitivized, renewable will not get that much of push that they deserve. So we are going through a very interesting times. I think a few more years will tell us where exactly we will be. So for instance, on Environment Day 2025, which will be the 50th anniversary of Environment Day, will we be looking at much more of renewable energy, much less of carbon energy? That's the future I would like to look for. Thank you.
Sir, I have one more question for you. How beneficial would the One Solar, One World, One Grid initiative be in the near future for subcontinental countries?
Yes, I think that's a very good strategic move. It's a very forward-looking, ambitious program. We all know the sun never dies. It's there on somewhere or other. So one would be to have solar panels way up so that it can get much more sun. The other would be to have solar panels distributed in a system, and that is what we are looking at: one sun, one world, one grid. It's easily said than done, but I think we have taken, our country has taken a bold decision, taken an initiative, so that a little bit of west of us and a little bit of east of us, we can expand. And the 4 or 5 hours of good sunlight that we say is within our country, that period can be extended to maybe 4 or 5 hours on the right and 4 or 5 hours on the left. If we get 10 hours or 12 hours of sunlight in the process, I think that changes the whole dynamics. So I think it's a very good move. I think many things will happen. And Dr. Desai was talking about importance of international collaboration. This is how the international collaboration really should take for changing the whole energy spectrum for the humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I have a question for Dr. Mashelkar.
Yes, please go on.
Yes. So the government has its own limitations in the post-COVID economic recovery. So industries can take equally important role in the recovery process. And what should they do to balance between the revenue lost in restoring profitability and ensuring sustainability while bringing about this change in the post-COVID world?
Yes, excellent question. In fact, industry has a huge responsibility. We can't just look at the government to solve all the problems. In fact, to anybody who has asked this question, the person who has asked this question, I'll send my paper, which was my R.K. Narayanan Memorial Oration, which I gave in Australia a couple of years ago, when I talked about CSR 1.0 and CSR 2.0 coming from industry. CSR 1.0 was doing well and doing good. That means you make a lot of money and one day you think, oh my God, what did I do for society? And you create a foundation and a trust. Like Bill Gates made a lot of money and he has created a fantastic foundation afterwards and he's doing good. So that is doing well and doing good, giving scholarships to the foundation, etc., etc. But a bigger impact is made in CSR 2.0 as I define in that paper, which is doing well by doing good. That means doing good itself is a business. For example, look at creating affordable medicines, and our drug and pharma industry has made money on that, and one can give so many such examples. where affordability coupled with large volumes basically have made sort of sustainable profits for companies. So moving into that, I think, is actually the key, because after all, uh, I would relate CSR 1.0 with sympathy, giving. Like today, for example, I've seen private sector come out and distribute meals and meals and meals, but that is doing good for the society. But that is not what we want finally. We don't want our people to be begging basically for food, and there have been pathetic scenes. Basically, we have to have a better society where they get access to affordable goods, services, education, health, etc., where private sector comes in and does that CSR 2.0. I'll be happy to send that a paper to the to the person who has asked this question, where I elaborate how that strategy can actually work. And there is also another paper with C.K. Prahlad that I have in Harvard Business Review, doing more from less for more and more people, and how businesses, actually the business strategies, how they can do well as do good.
Sir, I have one more question for you. We are seeing that our biodiverse areas in Western Ghats and the Northeast are being taken up by government in the name of development. So what can we do to stop this? And what strategies does the government also need to consider before going forward and clearing such areas?
Well, I think the right person to answer this question will be my friend Dr. Madhav Gadgil, who has spent his life in dealing with this challenge. I think the challenge before India is development without destruction. All right, destruction must be avoided at all extent, to every possible extent, but also development must go on. So the balancing environment, ecology, economics, along with equity and ethics, I think is really the way to go. And that is where, when we talk about the future, we talk about, I mean, I still remember our Lord Martin Rees, the former president of Royal Society, giving a talk where I was president of INSA, Indian National Science Academy, and he talked about 21st century, the last century, because he was worried about climate change and ozone layer depletion, pandemics, and so on. And most importantly, he had included ravaging of biodiversity as one of the issues. So yes, we'll be destroying our future for gaining the present, and we have to create that balance.
Thank you, sir. I think we are done with the question and answer sessions because I've run out of questions that have been asked by the participants. So we will stop well before time. And for that, before we stop, I would like to request Professor Amitav Malik, who is the convener of this dialogue, to give his concluding remarks and the vote of thanks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mansi. And thank you, everybody. The concluding remark I had requested Dr. Mashelkar to give. So, Dr. Mashelkar, may I request you to please share your concluding thoughts with us?
Yeah. In fact, I have a very easy job. I can just say thank you for this fantastic 1.5 hours that we had to every speaker. But I'll just make 2-3 comments. You know, it's very interesting. We had a large number of very, very interesting ideas indeed. And including, I was following the chat, I think there are a number of wonderful suggestions. And as usual, our team will pick up everything, basically, and create some sort of excellent extract of it, because that wisdom should not just be stored in PIC, but should be made available to the society and the government. There are a number of important issues that have been discussed, like integration of climate concerns, then the design thinking has to change in order to change the energy demand itself. How do we do that? Lata raised a fantastic issue about the role of children. You know, we talk about China and China is the bad boy today, but let me recall something because it is connected with what Lata said. I remember when I was director of NCL, we won a bid of World Bank to give consultancy to two Chinese institutions. And I remember going there and we just didn't have dollars with us. So I remember talking to the ambassador and getting an attaché from there, commercial attaché, to help us do the Chinese to English and English to Chinese translation. And I remember we were going via the some Beijing street, and there was a red light at which our car stopped. And this commercial attaché actually was smoking a cigarette, and he just threw, the half-finished cigarette out. And I remember a schoolgirl in her uniform coming, and she found him and gave him a receipt. She must have been 8 or 10-year-old sort of girl. Then I asked him what happens. He says, in this community, as a matter of fact, anybody can fine anybody for having done that. And I'm talking about China of 1991, 9 plus 20, 29 years ago. So I think, how do we build this awareness, that confidence within the children, that awareness? I think Lata has made an extremely important point, and Vijay reiterated it. The future belongs to them. We are gone. I'm also above 75. I don't know how many days I'm sort of left with. So I think these are children with aspiration, but also at the same time, they're acutely aware of the issues that we basically talk about. I think if I were to distill the entire discussion that we had, things are becoming clear. It says extreme efficiency. It says war on waste. And it also says value creation from locked up assets. And these locked up assets could be a number of them. And one of them, it's very interesting, Dr. Dasgupta mentioned about that, and history repeats itself. You know, he talked about in 2020 about gold, 24,000 tons of gold, $1,800 billion, and appealing to every Indian's heart, But amazingly, if you go back in 1991, you'll remember it was again gold. RBI airlifted 47 tons of gold to the Bank of England and 20 tons of gold to Union Bank of Switzerland to raise how much? $600 million at that point in time. So Nitin, it is very interesting. We are revisiting gold again as a savior after the previous economic crisis in 1991 and after this crisis in 2020. So when I talk about locked up assets, I'm very serious about it. There are so many assets that are locked up, and youth is one of the locked up assets. Talent, technology, and trust is what I always talk about. How do we, besides what Lata and Vijay have said, whatever they create, how do you make use of it to sort of make a radical transformation? On the other day, I was invited by the Chief Minister of Maharashtra to participate in a meeting to opening of schools. And then we are all talking about remote learning, etc. That is fine. But who has Zoom? Who has connectivity? What about those children in villages? I'm seeing the sorry scenes where from loudspeaker is beaming, giving talks, and schools are listening and taking down notes. I'm seeing a girl rising on the actually rooftop because she doesn't have connectivity and sitting alone there and taking lessons. These are ground realities. Now, how do you have access to these? I mean, iPads and so on. Now, I want to say that that's what I mean by a locked up asset, that talent. Who created that? Like Computer was created in 2001, which was rated as the best digital technology of 2001. It would have gone to our rural villages. Akash was created for $35. My Limitly New Millennium Indian Technology Leadership Initiative created an affordable laptop. But the public procurement policies and other things, actually we did not have and we did not take advantage of that. Otherwise, these $10 laptops and tablets, tablets should be in the hands of these people. That's what I mean by value creation from locked up assets. These are all locked up assets, whether it is gold or whether it is talent and so many things. I think, how do we create value out of that? So I would just summarize that this war on waste, extreme efficiency, and value creation have to be the three principles applied basically all across. I want to thank each one of you for this sort of splendid session. I want to thank Amitav and your entire team for making this fantastic evening possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mashelkar. Let me add my vote of thanks in a way. First of all, of course, we feel so lucky that we had a galaxy of very senior, experienced leaders amongst us, and the variety of thoughts that we shared just over about an hour, it's amazing. But fortunately, we have recorded all that. We are going to do a little bit of minor editing, and then we'll put it out on the YouTube on Monday. So please do review that YouTube, but just to go back and look at everything. Also, the video clips that we showed, that also we will put on the YouTube separately. So all of that we have done today, we will be putting it on the YouTube for larger audience to see. Please tell your friends and everybody else to benefit from that. Suffice to say, I have a pleasant duty to first of all thank our distinguished invited speakers, Dr. Nitin Desai and Dr. Dasgupta. What a wonderful way of putting so many different thoughts for us to learn from. Dr. Mashelkar, Dr. Kelkar, you have always been the leaders and the thought leaders for us. It is with your energy that PIC is going. I put in my best, but I think what matters is the team. And you are witness to our youngest member today, Mansi Kutwal. She's a top ranker in bachelor's in economics, but I found her, she's so versatile. And it is, Mansi, it is your future that we are talking about. But like her, our whole team, whether it's in energy, environment, climate change, or the PIC team, I see some of them are present here. They are fantastic. And it is the youth energy that keeps us driving. Last but not the least at all, we had fantastic audience. At the peak, we had 100, and maybe I think we had to say sorry to a few because the limit was 100. As we were closing up, we were 69, and now as I am closing up, it is still 55. So this is a huge satisfaction for all of us. Thank you, everybody, from the heart, on behalf of my team, on behalf of PIC. We will be doing this now. We are getting used to doing this. I'm very happy to say thank you again to everybody. Namaskar. All the best wishes of the Environment Day.